The day the Galatran students arrived was like any other, except it was. The humans stood outside the school, waiting, watching the massive starship descending through the clouds with its thunderous roar. The metallic hull of the ship gleamed in the sunlight, casting an ominous shadow over the field. The arrival of the alien delegation was a big deal for Earth. After all, this was the first time students from the stars had come to study on Earth, to learn what made humanity so unique. They had all come to see for themselves. Inside the ship, there was a strange mix of curiosity and arrogance. The aliens, beings from planets far and wide, were accustomed to their superiority. They had conquered galaxies, destroyed planets, and thrived in environments that were inhospitable to most species. They had seen it all, but they had never seen Earth. They had never seen humans. Maggie Jenkins stood in the courtyard, holding her clipboard, watching the ship slowly settle onto the tarmac. She had been working as the school nurse for nearly a decade, and today was no different from any other. She wasn't one of the administrators, nor was she a teacher. She was just the school nurse, a simple, quiet woman who spent her days bandaging scraped knees, handing out cough syrup, and telling kids to drink more water. Yet today she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Her chest tightened as she watched the ship. The alien students would be walking among them now. Maggie had been around long enough to know that, despite their size or their alien origins, they would view her as nothing more than a nurse. A weak, small, soft human, just someone who patched up wounds. But what they didn't know was that Maggie had scars of her own. Real scars. The aliens began to disembark, their steps heavy and loud as they set foot on Earth for the first time. Some of them were giants, their bodies towering above any human. One alien, core from the Gorathan species, stood nearly 8 feet tall, his 4 muscular arms rippling as he cracked his knuckles in the warm air. His skin was armored, tough as metal. Another, Vorn, was slender and quick with 3 sharp eyes, his movement so fast it was as if he were everywhere at once. The students looked around, eyes wide with wonder. Some whispered to each other in their own languages, clearly excited by the new surroundings. Maggie watched them all, but her attention was drawn to one figure in particular. The young human student Luke, nervously adjusting his backpack, kept glancing at the aliens, unsure of how to approach them. Maggie's heart softened. She had seen that look on so many faces, the same uncertainty she had felt when she was his age. He was just a kid, but today he was about to face something completely new. He was about to face beings from the stars, beings who could rip him apart with a single swipe of their hand if they wanted to. But it wasn't that thought that lingered in Maggie's mind. It was the thought of her own past, a past she had buried deep within herself, only to be dragged back into the light by the arrival of these alien students. "Just keep it together, Maggie," she muttered to herself under her breath. She didn't have time for old memories now, not when she had a job to do. As the aliens began to gather in the school courtyard, a tall administrator named Principal Hargrove stepped forward, extending a hand to greet the leader of the delegation, a creature with smooth purple skin and 4 wings, a Zendarian named Arvok. The two exchanged formalities, their voices low, but the tension between them was palpable. Earth's humans and the Galatran students were still strangers to one another, still unsure of how to bridge the gap between species. Maggie stood back, letting them do their introductions, but her eyes never left the group of students. She observed them, how they carried themselves, how they moved, how they looked at everything with a sense of superiority. It wasn't an arrogance they wore openly, but a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of domination and conquest. They didn't believe that anything on Earth could challenge them. That's when she caught sight of Kor again, his intimidating presence making the others step aside as he marched toward the medical tent where Maggie worked. He didn't even glance at her as he passed, his 4 arms swinging at his sides like weapons waiting to be unleashed. One of the alien students, Vorn, whispered something to him, pointing to Maggie. The others snickered. They thought she was just a simple human, a weakling. Maggie exhaled, shaking her head. She wasn't going to let it bother her. She had a job to do, and she was damn good at it. The aliens could think what they wanted. But the truth was, Maggie wasn't just a nurse, and these aliens would soon learn that the hard way. The moment was interrupted when a loud crash echoed from the direction of the sparring area where the students were supposed to demonstrate their skills. Maggie's head snapped toward the sound, heart pounding. Something was wrong. Without thinking, she dropped the clipboard and rushed toward the noise. It was time to prove to them once again just how wrong they were. The crash echoed through the school grounds like a thunderclap. The moment it sounded, Maggie's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes locked on the sparring area where a group of alien students was supposed to be showing off their combat skills. This wasn't part of the schedule, and from the sound of it, something had gone terribly wrong. Maggie didn't hesitate. She dropped the clipboard in her hands and bolted toward the field, her footsteps swift and steady. She wasn't the fastest, nor the strongest, but she knew how to move when people were in danger. As she rounded the corner of the sparring ring, she saw it, Kor the Gorathan standing over a human student, his 4 massive arms raised as though ready to crush. The student Luke was sprawled on the ground, barely conscious. His eyes fluttered, his breath shallow, and his body was bruised from the force of Kor's blows. A few other alien students stood frozen, their faces a mix of confusion and awe. Maggie's blood ran cold, but she didn't stop. She had seen this before. Kor wasn't just big, he was powerful. His species had been bred for combat, for strength. And it was clear he had no idea how to control that power when facing someone so much smaller. She knew exactly what had happened. Luke had been too quick to accept the challenge, too eager to prove himself in front of the aliens. He tried to go toe-to-toe with Kor, but no human could win in a fair fight against someone like that. Not without some serious backup. And right now, there was no backup. Maggie's mind raced. There was no time to wait for someone else to step in. She had to act. Her eyes scanned the surroundings quickly. A metal tray sat on the edge of the medical table. Perfect. Without a second thought, Maggie grabbed it, her hands steady as she gripped the edge. She turned, making sure no one else was in her way, and then she hurled it through the air. It sailed toward Kor's head with a force that would have surprised anyone who wasn't paying attention. The tray struck Kor hard on the side of his skull, sending a loud clang through the air. The giant alien staggered back, momentarily dazed, his many arms flailing for balance. His glowing eyes locked onto Maggie, his lips curling into a snarl. "You dare," he began, but his words were cut off by the sharp sound of Maggie's voice. "Get away from him, Kor," she said, her tone calm but firm. "This isn't a sparring match anymore." Kor's anger flared and he took a step forward, clearly ready to turn his fury on her. But Maggie stood her ground. She wasn't a soldier. She didn't have any of the special enhancements the alien students did. But what she had, what she'd always had, was the ability to think fast and stay calm in the worst of situations. "I said get away from him," Maggie repeated, her voice never wavering. There was a pause, a tense moment where it seemed like Kor might strike. But Maggie's eyes didn't leave his. She wasn't afraid. She couldn't afford to be. Then something in Kor's expression shifted. It wasn't fear exactly, but there was hesitation. Perhaps it was the realization that he wasn't dealing with just a nurse anymore. Maggie wasn't some weak human standing by while a powerful alien bullied the defenseless. She had seen the worst the universe could throw at her, and she wasn't about to back down now. Slowly, Kor's gaze moved to the other alien students who had been watching. They were all still, silent, as if waiting for him to make the next move. The air was thick with tension. Maggie could feel it in her chest, like a pressure building. Finally, Kor's shoulders slumped slightly, his anger diffusing. He let out a low growl, but he stepped away from Luke, turning his back on Maggie. His arms dropped to his sides, but not without casting one last defiant glare at her. Maggie didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her job wasn't to fight, it was to protect. As Kor retreated, Maggie quickly knelt beside Luke, checking his pulse. He was still alive, barely, but his breathing was shallow and his head was bleeding from the impact. She needed to get him to the nurse's office fast. "Stay with me, Luke," she whispered, her fingers pressing gently against his neck. "You're going to be fine, just breathe." The alien students watched her, some of them uneasy, others visibly shaken. Kor had been one of the fiercest fighters they'd ever seen. He had been trained to fight in wars across galaxies. But here on Earth, it was a human, a simple nurse, who had stepped in to stop him. Maggie's chest tightened, her hands working quickly to stabilize Luke. She didn't have time to think about what the aliens were thinking. The boy in front of her needed help. He needed her. As she lifted him carefully, the alien students began to murmur among themselves. Some seemed impressed, others not so much. But Maggie didn't care about their opinions. She just cared about getting Luke to safety. But there was one thing she could feel, the shift. The moment when they realized she wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't just some weak human who patched up scrapes and bruises. Maggie Jenkins had done something none of them had expected. She had stopped Kor, the Gorathan warlord, with nothing but her courage and quick thinking. As she walked away, the other students parted to make way for her. They might not have understood yet, but they were beginning to see it. Maggie wasn't just a nurse. She was someone who had been through battles of her own and had come out stronger for it. The days that followed the sparring incident felt different. The air at the school seemed charged with something new, something unspoken. The alien students walked the halls with a quiet sense of uncertainty. They weren't just observing Earth anymore. They were beginning to understand that the humans here, particularly their school nurse, were more than they appeared. Maggie could feel it. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the subtle shift in their gazes when they passed her in the hallways. They hadn't expected her to step in when Core had attacked. They hadn't expected a small, unassuming woman to face off against someone like him and win. But that was just the beginning. As the week wore on, Maggie continued with her work. She treated bruises, bandaged cuts, and comforted the students when they needed her. She did what she had always done, without complaint, without fanfare. But there was something more now. Every time she passed the group of alien students, she could feel their curiosity, their growing respect for her. One afternoon, as Maggie sat in the nurse's office, filing paperwork, the door creaked open. It was Vorn, the Zendarian. His 3 sharp eyes glinted with an intensity that Maggie hadn't seen in him before. He stepped in slowly, almost cautiously, his hands clasped behind his back. "Can I help you, Vorn?" Maggie asked, not looking up from the papers. She knew he was there for a reason, but she didn't want to make him feel uncomfortable. She could tell that many of the alien students still felt out of place. Earth was strange to them, and the humans even stranger. Vorn hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "I've been thinking about what happened with Core. You." "I didn't do anything special," Maggie interrupted, looking up at him with a calm smile. "I just did what I had to do." Vorn's eyes narrowed slightly. "No, you didn't. You stopped him. You did something none of us could have done." Maggie felt her chest tighten. She wasn't sure why Vorn's words made her heart race, but they did. Perhaps it was the weight of the respect in his voice. Perhaps it was the realization that they were beginning to see her, truly see her for who she was, not just a nurse, not just a fragile human, but someone with real strength, real grit. She leaned back in her chair, sighing quietly. "I'm not special, Vorn. I've just been through a lot, more than most people know." Vorn didn't respond right away. He took a step closer, studying her. He looked at the faint scars on her arms, the ones that no one had dared to ask about yet. Maggie could see the questions in his eyes, but she knew he wouldn't ask. Not yet, anyway. Instead, he said, "I want to understand. I want to know what makes you different from the rest of us." Maggie was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew he wasn't just talking about strength. He was asking something deeper, something personal. It was a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer, but somehow she knew it was coming. "I don't think I'm different, Vorn," she said finally, her voice quiet. "I think I'm just like everyone else. I've just had to fight harder to stay alive." Vorn nodded, but before he could say anything more, the door to the nurse's office burst open with a loud crash. Maggie looked up, her heart skipping a beat. It was Core, and he wasn't alone. Several other alien students had gathered around him, their faces twisted with a mix of amusement and mockery. "You," Core growled, pointing at Maggie with a menacing glare. "You think you can stand in my way? You think you're strong?" Maggie didn't flinch. She had already faced him once, and she wasn't about to let him intimidate her now. Her gaze remained steady as she stood up from her chair, her posture calm but unyielding. "Is there a reason you're here, Core?" she asked, her voice firm but measured. The alien student snickered behind Core, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Core's forearms flexed as he stepped closer, his massive form towering over her. "I'm here to teach you a lesson, human," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're nothing but a weakling. You should have stayed out of the fight when I told you to." Maggie took a deep breath, pushing down the memories that flooded her mind. She had heard this before. The words, the threats, they were nothing new. She'd faced down worse in her past. She knew how to handle fear. "I don't want trouble, Core," Maggie said, her voice unwavering. "But if you want to start something, you'll have to go through me." Core let out a booming laugh, shaking his head. "You think you can stop me? You think a little human like you can face me in battle?" Maggie's eyes narrowed. She knew what he was doing. He was trying to provoke her, trying to get her to fight him again. He wanted to prove something. But Maggie wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her scared. "No, Core," she said softly, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "I don't think I can stop you, but I do think I can keep standing, and maybe that's what really scares you." The room fell into a heavy silence. Kor's face twisted, his many eyes flickering with a mix of anger and something else, something Maggie recognized. It was fear. Fear of a human who wouldn't back down. The alien students shifted uneasily, their laughter fading as they began to sense that something deeper was happening. Kor's eyes met Maggie's, and for the first time she saw something in him that wasn't anger. It was doubt. "Get out of my way, human," Kor growled, turning away with a final glare. He stalked out of the room, his followers trailing behind him, leaving Maggie and Vorn alone. Vorn looked at Maggie, his expression unreadable. "I didn't think he would back down," he admitted. Maggie smiled faintly. "Neither did I." And in that moment, Maggie realized something. The students weren't just seeing her differently, they were beginning to understand the strength that lay within humanity. Strength not just in battle, but in standing tall, even when everything else seemed to crumble. She wasn't just a nurse anymore, she was a symbol. And the alien students were learning to respect her, not because she was strong in the ways they understood, but because she was strong in the way they could never be. The morning after Kor's confrontation in the nurse's office, things felt different at the school. The students walked the halls with less arrogance, more thoughtfulness. The whispers had begun. Maggie could feel the weight of their attention wherever she went, but she didn't let it bother her. She had a job to do, and that job didn't change, no matter who was watching. But that morning, something was wrong. A message had come through on the school's comm system, a real emergency. Earth wasn't as safe as the alien students had thought. Maggie's hands shook as she read the message. A group of hostile aliens, one of the many factions that had been watching Earth from the shadows, had begun to infiltrate the area. They were not the kind of enemy that could be reasoned with. They were violent, deadly, and looking for chaos. And they had already made their move. Maggie's mind raced, her pulse quickening. The students had no idea what they were up against, but she did. She had faced real combat in her past, in wars that had ravaged not just Earth, but countless other planets. She knew how to fight, how to survive. And she knew the most important thing in any battle was to stay calm. The school's defenses were strong, but no one was expecting an assault this early. No one was prepared for the danger that had arrived. Maggie took a deep breath. She didn't have time to think about the past, about the things she had buried deep inside her. This was happening now, and now she had to act. "Stay calm," she muttered under her breath as she ran down the hall toward the communications room. The message hadn't given any details about the threat's location, just a warning. She needed to get to the students, fast. She passed several of them along the way. Their faces were filled with confusion, with fear. The alien students weren't used to being in danger. They were used to dominating, not running, but Earth was different. Earth had its own kind of strength, and Maggie knew it was time to remind them of that. She reached the communications room and tapped in the emergency alert. The school went into lockdown mode, a series of lights flashing red as the security systems kicked in. The alien students began to assemble in the main hall, looking for guidance. Maggie took a moment to check in with the administrators, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts were on the battlefield, her battlefield, the one she'd fought on before. Flashback. It was years ago. Maggie, a younger version of herself, stood on a war-torn planet. Her uniform was torn, her face covered in dirt, but her eyes were sharp, determined. She had seen more bloodshed than anyone should ever have to. She had been a combat medic, tending to wounded soldiers, but she had also been on the front lines, fighting with a rifle in her hand and fire in her heart. The scars on her arms, the ones the alien students had noticed, weren't from medical accidents. They were from combat, real combat, from a war that had nearly destroyed her but hadn't. She had survived because she had to, because she was human. Maggie didn't have the physical enhancements that the alien soldiers did, but what she had was her mind. She could outthink her enemies, outlast them, and when the battle was over, she would be the one standing. Back to the present. The sound of the alarms jolted Maggie back to reality. She didn't have time to think about her past right now. She had to focus on the students. As she entered the main hall, the alien students were already gathered, some looking nervous, others more determined. Kor stood at the front, his arms crossed, his face hard and unreadable. He didn't seem afraid, but there was something else there, a flicker of uncertainty. They had all heard the warnings. They had all felt the tension. The threat was real. Maggie walked past them, heading toward the door that led to the school's outer perimeter. She glanced at the students, each of them watching her closely. They were expecting orders. They were expecting her to tell them what to do, and for a moment she hesitated. These weren't just human students she was guiding now. These were alien students, beings from worlds far more dangerous than Earth. Could she really be the one to lead them? Her heart pounded, but then she looked at them all, Kor, Vorn, and the others, and she realized something. They weren't the enemy. They were scared, just like she had been, just like any soldier was before a battle. And the one thing that all warriors, human or alien, had in common was the instinct to protect what mattered. "You want to survive this," Maggie said, her voice calm but carrying across the room. "Then listen up. I'll guide you. I'll show you how we fight on Earth, and if you want to make it through this, you'll follow my lead." Kor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. He was no fool. He knew that Maggie wasn't bluffing. She had faced horrors he couldn't even imagine. The scars on her arms, the steady look in her eyes, it all spoke of a lifetime spent fighting, surviving. Maggie moved to the front of the group, her voice rising. "We don't have time for egos or pride. If you want to win, we need to work together. I don't care how big you are or how fast you can move. This fight won't be won by strength alone." She paused, locking eyes with Kor, then with the others. "It'll be won by brains, by thinking ahead, by sticking together. That's how we win." And for the first time since they had arrived on Earth, the alien students didn't laugh. They didn't scoff. They just nodded, listening. The realization was settling in, slow but sure. Maggie was right. This wasn't a fight they could win alone. As the group moved into action, preparing to face the unknown threat, Maggie felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this fight would be different, because the aliens weren't the only ones who had something to prove. Maggie had spent years proving that humans weren't just survivors. They were fighters, and today she was going to prove it once again. The skies above the school darkened. What had started as a normal day was now filled with tension and fear. The warning had come in fast, too fast for anyone to prepare. The hostile alien faction was already on Earth, and they had chosen this moment to strike. They hadn't just come for a simple raid. No, they wanted something much worse. They wanted to destabilize everything. They wanted chaos. The students, alien and human alike, stood in the courtyard, the once peaceful space now filled with a sense of unease. Maggie had never seen them like this. They were all trained in different forms of combat, each species with its own methods. But Earth's reality was something new, something none of them had fully understood until now. Maggie stood before them, looking out at the distance where the first signs of the attack began to show. In the far distance, dark shapes moved swiftly, shadows against the setting sun. The invaders had come in waves, approaching the campus from multiple directions. They were armed with advanced weaponry, and Maggie knew that, without the right plan, no one would be safe. "Stay focused," she said, her voice steady, cutting through the air like a blade. "This isn't just a fight for survival. This is about keeping Earth safe, keeping each other safe." The alien students who had once seen her as nothing more than a nurse now looked at her with newfound respect. They had watched her fight Kor and seen the strength in her that none of them had expected. They were starting to understand that Maggie was more than just a nurse. She was a survivor, a fighter. Vorn the Zendarian stepped forward, his three sharp eyes gleaming. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Maggie looked around, seeing the faces of the students. Kor, towering and quiet, stood to one side, his arms crossed in a way that looked almost protective. The others, Vorn and the rest of the alien students, were ready to follow her lead. But Maggie knew they would need more than just strength to win this fight. They would need every ounce of their humanity. They would need to work together. "We split up," Maggie said. "We can't stay in one place. We'll use the school's layout to our advantage. We'll hit them hard and fast." She turned to the students, her gaze sharp. "Kor, you take the north entrance. You've got strength. Use it. The rest of you stay hidden. Use the terrain. They're not expecting humans to be able to fight back, but they're wrong." She paused, locking eyes with each student. "If you follow my lead, we'll make it through this. But you have to trust me. You have to trust that humans have something that can't be measured in strength or size. We have resilience, and we never back down." Maggie turned to face the path where the first of the invaders were approaching. The sound of heavy boots pounding against the earth, mixed with the whirring hum of weapons being readied, grew louder. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let the fear take over. She had faced worse than this before, and now she had something that gave her strength. These students, these allies. They weren't just aliens anymore. They were her team. As the enemy drew closer, Maggie raised her hand, signaling the students to move into position. Kor, true to his word, was first to act. He ran toward the northern perimeter, his massive body charging like a tank, ready to crush anything in his path. Maggie could hear the roar of his voice as he called out, "Bring it." Maggie took a deep breath and signaled for Vorn and the others to follow her. They darted toward the back of the school, where the invaders were likely to make their next move. She could hear the sound of laser fire in the distance, followed by the explosive sound of something heavy hitting the ground. The battle had begun. She wasn't going to let fear rule her, not today. As they reached their position, Maggie quickly surveyed the area. There were a few large rocks nearby, perfect for taking cover. She crouched low, her hands signaling for the students to do the same. Vorn looked at her, his eyes sharp and full of focus. "What now?" he asked, breathless from the adrenaline rushing through him. "Wait for it," Maggie replied, her eyes locked on the distance. "Let them get closer. We're going to take them by surprise." Moments later, the first of the invaders came into view. They were armed with sleek, advanced weapons, their eyes scanning for any signs of life. They didn't see Maggie and the students hiding behind the rocks, their positions covered by the terrain. Maggie's pulse quickened. It wasn't the first time she'd been in this kind of situation, but it didn't make it any easier. She had to rely on her instincts, her years of experience in combat. She wasn't just fighting for Earth now. She was fighting for the future of her students, the future of humanity. With a quick motion, Maggie raised her hand, signaling the attack. She could hear the faint whir of blasters as Vorn and the others unleashed a hail of fire, taking out two of the invaders in an instant. The sudden explosion of light and sound echoed across the courtyard, sending the remaining invaders into a panic. "Now," Maggie shouted, and the students surged forward, moving with precision and speed. Kor's voice roared in the distance as he charged through the enemy ranks, tearing through their lines with his immense strength. Vorn darted from cover to cover, his eyes always moving, his body too fast for the invaders to track. Maggie was right in the thick of it, her movements swift and calculated. She had no weapon, but she didn't need one. She was the weapon. Her body was trained to fight to take down the strongest opponents. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. In that moment, she felt a surge of power, a connection to something greater than herself. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting to protect what mattered, to show these students the true strength of humanity. The battle raged on, but Maggie had no doubt in her mind. They would win. The invaders had underestimated Earth. They had underestimated her. And now they were about to learn the hard way that humanity would never back down. And neither would she. The battle raged on for what felt like hours. The air was thick with smoke, the ground trembling from the force of explosions. Maggie moved swiftly, her heart pounding in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had done this before, and she would do it again. Her students, human and alien alike, were fighting by her side. Together, they were holding their ground. Kor was still at the northern perimeter, roaring in battle, his massive form cutting through enemy ranks like a living wrecking ball. Vorn and the others had scattered, using the terrain to stay hidden, their firepower taking down invader after invader. Maggie couldn't see them all, but she knew they were doing their part. But the enemy wasn't backing down. The invaders, despite their advanced weaponry and numbers, were starting to regroup. They were no longer charging blindly into battle. They were pulling back, strategizing, waiting for their chance to strike back harder. Maggie could feel the shift in the air. The invaders had realized that they weren't just dealing with human soldiers, they were facing something much more dangerous. They were facing humanity's determination. And that's when the worst happened. A loud crackle came over the comm system, followed by static. Maggie's stomach tightened. It was the voice of the school's administrator, the one in charge of coordinating defense. "Everyone get to the west side," the voice shouted. "We've lost control of the main defense system. They're coming through the gates." Panic spread through the alien students, their eyes wide as the realization sank in. The invaders had breached the outer defenses. The west side, the main gate, was exposed. Maggie didn't have time to think. Without a second's hesitation, she turned toward Kor. He was still locked in fierce combat, fighting off invaders one by one, but he hadn't heard the call. "Kor," Maggie shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. He didn't turn at first. He was too focused on the battle, but Maggie wasn't going to let him miss this. She ran toward him, dodging blaster fire that streaked by her head, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Kor finally looked her way, his eyes narrowing as he saw the urgency in her face. "The main gate's been breached," Maggie yelled. "We need to fall back now." Kor's expression twisted into something between rage and frustration. He didn't want to retreat. It wasn't in his nature. But even he could see the gravity of the situation. With a grunt, he nodded and turned toward the others. His booming voice called out, rallying the alien students who had scattered across the field. They needed to regroup to fall back before it was too late. The West Gate wasn't just an entry point, it was the school's lifeline. If the invaders took it, the school would fall. And that meant the end of everything they had fought for. Maggie's legs burned as she sprinted toward the west side. She could see the invaders now, more of them pouring through the gates, weapons raised. It wasn't just their numbers that scared her. It was the way they were coordinating, the way they had adapted so quickly. They were here for Earth's destruction, and they were doing everything they could to make that a reality. The alien students followed her, but they were tired. They had been fighting for so long, and the constant barrage of enemy fire was starting to take its toll. Kor, though fierce, was covered in cuts and bruises, his massive body showing signs of wear. But Maggie didn't stop. She couldn't. If she did, it would all be for nothing. As they reached the west side of the school, Maggie's eyes scanned the area for any sign of help. The remaining defenses were barely holding, and the main gate was wide open. She knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before the invaders made their final push. She felt a hand on her shoulder, and when she turned, she saw Vorn. He had a grim look on his face, his three eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "We're losing them," he said, his voice tight with fear. "The defense units, they're down." Maggie's chest tightened, but she didn't let fear show. "Then we fight until we can't fight anymore." The alien students gathered around her, their faces filled with a mix of exhaustion and determination. They had never seen a human so resolute, so ready to face the enemy head-on. And something about that, it made them believe. It made them feel the same surge of strength that Maggie felt. "Everyone, listen up," Maggie shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the battle. "We have one chance at this. We're going to make a stand right here." There was no time for strategy now. There was only action. She grabbed the nearest weapon, an alien blaster one of the students had dropped, and checked the charge. Then she raised it to the sky, firing a round that sent sparks flying into the air. "Take cover," she yelled, signaling for the others to get into position. Kor, the largest and strongest of them all, charged forward, using his strength to take down the first wave of invaders. Vorn darted from side to side, picking off enemies with precision. And Maggie? She moved like a shadow, slipping between enemy lines, hitting them where it hurt. It was chaos, it was madness, but it was also the moment when everything changed. For the first time, the alien students saw it. They saw what humans were made of. They saw how Maggie fought, not with just brute strength, but with the kind of heart that made a person never want to stop, no matter how hard things got. And that was when the tide began to turn. The invaders were starting to slow, their ranks thinning as the students pushed back, fighting harder with every second that passed. And as the last of the invaders began to retreat, Maggie stood tall, her heart pounding, her breath ragged, but victorious. They had won, they had held their ground. Maggie looked at the alien students, the ones who had once thought of her as weak, as just a nurse. Now they were looking at her differently. They were looking at her like a hero. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it too. The battle was over. The last of the invaders had retreated, fleeing into the shadows, leaving behind the remnants of their failed assault. The courtyard was quiet now, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Maggie stood amidst the wreckage, her body bruised, her clothes torn, but her heart was still beating strong. The alien students gathered around her, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and awe. They had seen her fight. They had seen her push through the chaos, never stopping, never hesitating. They had seen her lead them to victory. And in that moment they realized something. They had underestimated humanity. Maggie had been a nurse to them, a quiet, unassuming figure who patched up wounds and offered kind words. But she had shown them something far more powerful. She had shown them what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. Kor, the towering Gorathan, stood to one side, his usual bravado now replaced with something else, respect. He was breathing heavily, his forearms covered in dirt and blood, but his eyes were clear. He looked at Maggie as though he were seeing her for the first time. "You were right," he said, his deep voice rumbling. "I thought you were just some weak human, but you're something else." Maggie didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, too tired to respond. She had always known this moment would come, but she had never expected it to feel so heavy. She had fought for so long, for so many years, and now, for the first time, she could feel the weight of it all, of every battle, every loss, and every victory. Vorn the Zendarian stepped forward next, his 3 eyes wide with admiration. "We never saw it, we never saw you, but now we understand," he said quietly. "Humans are stronger than we thought." Maggie shook her head slowly. "I'm not stronger than any of you, I just never gave up. That's what makes us different. Humans were survivors. We fight when it seems hopeless because we don't know how to quit." The students stood silently for a moment, reflecting on her words. They had fought by her side, seen her take down enemies who seemed unstoppable, and had witnessed the power of her resilience. They had come to Earth expecting to learn about the people here, to study their strengths and weaknesses. But what they had learned was something far more profound than any textbook could teach. The school, now safe once more, began to come back to life. The staff, who had been in hiding during the battle, emerged cautiously from the buildings. They saw the damage, the remnants of the fight, but they also saw something else. They saw the alien students, together, strong and safe, and they saw Maggie standing at the center of it all. Principal Hargrove approached her, his face solemn but filled with gratitude. "Maggie, I don't know what to say. You saved us. You saved all of us." Maggie's eyes met his, but she didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. "We saved each other," she said softly. Kor stepped forward again, his massive frame towering over everyone, but his tone was respectful, almost humbled. "Maggie, we've been to a lot of worlds. We've seen the strongest armies, the fiercest warriors. But I've never seen anyone fight the way you do. Never seen anyone with your heart." Maggie looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. "It's not about being the strongest. It's about standing up when everyone else thinks you can't. It's about protecting the ones you care about, and that's what we did." The alien students nodded in agreement. There was no more mockery in their eyes, no more disbelief. They had seen what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. They had seen the power of the human spirit. As the day drew to a close and the sun dipped below the horizon, the students began to disperse, returning to their quarters to rest and recover from the battle. But Maggie stayed behind for a moment, watching as the world around her slowly returned to normal. The sky was clear again, and the stars were just beginning to twinkle in the distance. Vorn approached her, his 3 eyes still filled with awe. "Maggie, I think I understand now. We came here to learn about Earth, but we learned something more. We learned about you, about humanity." Maggie smiled softly. "Sometimes it takes a little chaos to show us who we really are." She turned to walk away, but Vorn's voice stopped her. "Maggie," he said, his tone serious, "I don't think you realize what you've done. You've changed us. You've shown us what it means to be human, to fight for what matters." Maggie paused, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite put into words. She had always been the quiet one, the nurse, the healer, the one who worked behind the scenes. But today she had shown them that strength came in many forms. It didn't always look like power. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was simply standing your ground. She looked at Vorn, then at Kor and the others. They were all watching her now, their faces filled with something new: respect, admiration, understanding. And for the first time, Maggie didn't feel small. She didn't feel like just a nurse. She felt like a warrior. As she walked back to the nurse's office, the weight of the day's events slowly began to settle in. The battle was over. Earth was safe. The students had learned the lesson she had always hoped they would, that humanity wasn't just about surviving, it was about never giving up, no matter the odds. Maggie Jenkins, the nurse, had shown them what it meant to fight, and in doing so, she had left a legacy that no alien student would ever forget. And that, Maggie knew, was the greatest victory of all. Suspicious activity detected. It looks like someone else may be using your ChatGPT account. Please secure your account to regain access to all features. Learn more. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.